So today we are starting Unit 3, and this unit is on climate. So we've already talked briefly about climate, and we talked about the differences between climate and weather. What did we say weather was? Happens day to day, right? And climate, over what? Over years, over a long period of time, okay? So weather is day to day, and climate happens over years, over time, okay? So how do you describe climate and the factors that affect it? How would you describe it? No wrong answers, I want your thoughts. How would you describe climate? You just told me. Okay, so when we look at weather and how that happens over a long period of time, then that can give us climate for areas. Now, what about some things that might affect climate? What are some things that you think might affect climate? What do you think? Okay. You got something specific in mind? But that's not wrong. Okay, the sun. All right. We'll see where we're at. Anybody else got thoughts, ideas? Are you looking for the answer? Nothing. All right, it's your Monday, so we'll roll with this. Here we go. All right. So, what is climate? Climate is the year-long average of weather patterns over an area. Okay. So it can be different from one location to another. So is the weather going to be the same here in North Carolina as it is in California? No. What about Pennsylvania? Washington State? Texas? Okay. Can some states or areas have similar climates? Sure. But depending on the location and the things that affect where that location is, makes the climate different. Okay? So some factors that affect climate are latitude, elevation, topography, water bodies, global winds, and vegetation. And we're going to talk about each of those specifically. Okay? So the first one is latitude. So as latitude increases, the intensity of the solar energy decreases. And where does the solar energy come from? The sun. Okay? There are 3 zones: tropical, temperate, and polar. So zone 1 is the tropical zone. This is the region between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn. Okay, so this is where you see the green. Okay, so this is warm year-round. This is where we want to be, right? On an island somewhere. Oh yeah, that's cool. That's cool. Have you ever been? No, me neither. I've been to Jamaica. Next is the temperate zone. Okay, this is the region between 23.5 north-south, okay, and 66.5 north-south of the equator. So the tropical zone is in the middle because it's closest to the equator. Then the temperate zones are going to go above and below that tropical zone. So they're either north of it or south of the tropical zone. These areas have hot summers and cold winters. Okay? Zone 3 is the polar zone. And we've seen some of these terms already when we talked about air masses. Yes? Okay? So the polar zone is the region that is either also north or south of the equator, and it's at the poles. So this is cold temperatures all year round. So tropical, think the island life near the equator, and it's always warm, right? You gonna be on a tropical island somewhere? No. Really? No. No, I said, do you want to be? All right, so tropical, equator, warm. Temperate, above and below the tropical. So we've got cold winters, so think of what happens here, and warm summers, right? Then you've got the polar. That's towards the poles on either end, and that is going to be cold all year. Everybody follow? Good? All right, next is elevation. So the higher the elevation, the colder the climate. So think the difference between eastern North Carolina and the west side of the state. So what's the west side of the state? The mountains, right? And what's the temperature like there? It's colder, right? They get more snow than we do here, right? We get a lot of ice. So the elevation determines the amount of precipitation it receives as well, okay? So the higher the elevation, the colder the climate, and then it also determines the amount of precipitation. Number 3 is topography, okay? This is dealing with land features that affect the amount of precipitation that fall over an area. So mountains cause a rain shadow event, okay? Because think if you have a mountain, right, you can't see over the other, so it kind of casts a shadow on the opposite side, okay? So one side has cool, wet air, and the other side has warm, dry air. That's just like anywhere. You can leave school, it could be raining. You can get a mile, 2 or down the road, is it raining? It might not be, okay? Number 4 is the water bodies. So large bodies of water, like lakes and oceans, have an important effect on the temperature of an area. So we talked about air over water and air over land in the meteorology unit. So the temperature of the water body influences the temperature of the air above. So the land is typically really what? Land. Dry. And the water, over the water, the body of water would be moist. Okay? Number 5 are global winds. Okay? So these are winds that distribute heat and moisture around the earth. So warm air moves to the poles and cold air moves to the equator. So warm to the poles, because warm air does what? And cold air drops, it sinks. Okay, cold air is much more dense, so it sinks, and the warm air rises. Okay? And last is vegetation. This affects both temperature and precipitation. Okay? So the temperature influences how much of the sun's energy is absorbed and how quickly it is released. And precipitation is when plants release water vapor from its leaves into the air. So precipitation is a piece of the water cycle. We talked about condensation last unit, when we talked about fog, okay? So precipitation is when plants release water vapor from its leaves into the air, which is technically called transpiration, which is another part of the water cycle, because you have evaporation, condensation, precipitation, and transpiration. So precipitation comes down, the trees get water, leaves get wet. Okay, and then when the plants release the water from its leaves, that is known as transpiration. Okay, does anybody have questions? Super straightforward? Yes? All right.